Welcome to The Baking Journalist. Today, finally, I'm going to make Egyptian Fino bread. I've tried this a number of times, not done it very well, but hopefully this is the one we're going to make something edible and close to what it's supposed to be. Let's do it. Welcome to The Baking Journalist. I am a baking journalist, Tony Ganzer, and today we are going to make Egyptian Fino bread. And in the last video, I kind of gave you an update on some of the research I was doing to try to learn how to actually make this bread. You make it in a pot, it's milk and butter based, and you have to let it rise for a long time. So I've been watching a lot of videos, some of them in Arabic, just watching people make it, trying to get a recipe right. I've tried to make it 4 or 5 times and it hasn't turned out very well, but this time we're going to make it, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, well, you're going to be along with me for this ride. And I'm also going to give you a story from my reporting in Cairo in 2012 after the revolution. But first, let's see the ingredients. For Egyptian Fino bread, you're going to need a ½ cup of warm milk, a ¼ cup of warm water, 1 packet of yeast, 1 tablespoon of sugar, a ½ teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil, 1 tablespoon of butter, and 2 cups of wheat flour. So as we melt our butter here and not let it get too hot for the yeast, I'll start my story. In 2012, I was still working for World Radio Switzerland in Zurich, and I was doing a story about social workers who would help homeless people who wanted to stay outdoors and live on the streets even when it was really cold. And the social workers would have to check to make sure that these people had enough equipment so they wouldn't die, and that they knew that there were shelters available and groups that would help give them food or other supplies just in case they needed it. So on this ride along that I did with social workers, one of the social workers' names was Hamed, and this was a tall guy, and I found out he was Egyptian. He's a big black Egyptian man who doesn't look like your typical Swiss person. If you want to think of stereotypical Swiss, he wasn't it. And I asked him where he was from, and he said Egypt. And I asked him if he had any thoughts on the revolution. This had been a year since the revolution when Hosni Mubarak was deposed. And he said, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. Fair enough. So throughout the evening, we went around and we saw where homeless people were sleeping. I did my reporting, and at the end of the night, he had kind of loosened up. He saw how I worked and said, if you really want to know how Egypt is now and how Cairo is, why don't you travel with me and I'll show you my Cairo. And I asked if he's serious, and he said, yeah, I'm serious. So I talked to my boss the next day, who said, go ahead, book it, go for it. And I did. So I started doing preliminary reporting and just planning for a week in Cairo, and I was going to do a series of reports both with Hamed and other reports. I was going to talk to the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, the International Committee of the Red Cross, pick up a few stories along the way. So on this trip, Hamed's mother still lived on a rooftop just down the street from Tahrir Square, which was the center of the revolution, where people demonstrated and finally voiced how they were feeling under the Mubarak regime, and then subsequently too.
Shit. Sabe, عايز يضرب. الشعب عايز.
And Hamed's mother still lived in a building that was built to be a shack for maintenance workers, but it was expanded into kind of this suite on the rooftop where Hamed's family was living. So they saw everything from a bird's eye view, which was really fascinating. So Hamed took me around. He showed me his old neighborhood. You know, he described how things are different, how they were under Mubarak, and then how they had changed since the revolution. You know, the famous Hanel Halili market where you can buy spices and things. There was like a section where you could get bootleg Chinese cigarettes and stun guns and knives. And Hamed said that was not the case before. Things had definitely changed. So one of the places he said he used to go was the pyramids, and he would rent a horse and just make a grill out in the desert. And that's where he would find peace. So Hamed would rent a horse and go out and just make a grill and relax in the desert. And I said to him, I really want to see that. Take me there, show me that, and we can talk more about finding peace in turbulent times, you know. So we take a taxi to the pyramids of Giza, and it took quite a while to get across the city. And we get there, and I buy tickets for Hamed and me, and there's a little shack with a security checkpoint. There's a metal detector, lots of guards around holding guns. Hamed told me some of the guns weren't real, but I wasn't going to test that, you know. So I put my bag on the conveyor belt to go through the metal detector and the x-ray machine. And everybody starts to get pretty loud, and they start to yell, and it's clear that something's wrong. So I ask Hamed what's going on, and he says they think you have a camera and you're a TV crew, and you have to have a permit to go into the pyramids with a camera. And I said, well, tell them I'm just a radio guy. And he said it doesn't matter. They think you're TV. They're not going to let you through. So I get my gear again, and we walk outside, and they say you can go in, but you can't bring your equipment. And that's kind of a problem for a journalist. And so Hamed and I are trying to figure out what to do, and there's lots of plainclothes police officers all around. And I asked him, you know, is there a fee we can pay, you know, to get through? I didn't know. And he said the only fee that they care about is the permit fee, which would cost $5,000. And I wasn't going to do that for a radio story. I didn't have that kind of money. So I asked him who was in charge, who is the head person at the pyramids on that day. And he kind of looked at me like, what are you doing? And I said, just find out who's in charge. Maybe if we explain to them the situation, everything will be okay. And he was skeptical about our ability to convince people. And so we talked to a plainclothes policeman, and Hamed explains what's going on. And the plainclothes policeman looks at me and looks at Hamed, and I kind of get the feeling that they were saying, you know, who is this guy? This is silly. But we find out that the man in charge of the pyramids on that day from the Ministry of Culture is sitting, drinking tea, reading a newspaper by a public toilet. He's just sitting on the ground. And so we walk over to him and explain what's going on. And he looks at me again with a skeptical eye, and he says, yeah, fine, it's fine. So Hamed says, wow, we can go. So we get a plainclothes policeman to walk with us, and he's carrying what appears to be an AK-47. Again, Hamed says they weren't real, but I don't know. And we walk through security, and we're walking to the pyramid. And then this guy says, no, I can't do it. This is translated through Hamed. I can't do it. I have a family. This isn't going to work. Oh, this isn't right. This isn't right. So he says we have to leave again, just as soon as we got through. So we have to walk back through security, and we're walking toward the public toilet again. And Hamid is talking to this guy, and I say, Hamid, what's going on? And he says, don't worry, it's a Muslim thing, it'll be okay. And to this day, I don't know what he meant by that. There was some agreement or you know, a trust relationship thing. So we walk to the public toilet, and he says, you're going to leave your recording gear in the public toilet. And I said, what? What am I doing? And he said, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. So the main attendant of the public toilet comes out. You've got the Ministry of Culture guy who's sitting there. Got plainclothes police all over the place. And the bathroom attendant has a plastic bag. And I'm to put my backpack in there. So I take out my SD card out of my recorder and put it in my pocket. And then I put my backpack in to this trash bag, really expecting never to see that stuff again, to be honest. So we get through security, we go toward the pyramids. I still had my trusty iPhone 3GS, so I did get the interview with Hamid, and he could describe some things, and it did fit into a story. And when we were done, we walked back to the public toilet, and I don't know what to expect. So when we get there, there's kind of a crowd that gathers, and the public attendant, bathroom attendant, calls for his assistant. And the main bathroom attendant, his face has a look of fear that I will never forget. Deathly serious. And the trash bag is put on the ground in front of me. He opens the trash bag. There's another trash bag. He opens that trash bag, and inside is my backpack. And he puts it down at my feet. And again, the faces around are very serious. And Hamid says, okay, check it. Make sure everything's in there. So I open it and I look for two things. One is my microphone and one is my recorder. And both of those things are in there. So I look up and I say, everything's fine, everything's fine. And I smile, and then everybody kind of smiles around me. And the tension was broken for a minute. So Hamid says, why don't you go ahead and pay this man? So I brought out some money, I paid him. I gave everybody some Swiss chocolate as a goodwill offering. And then Hamid said, we need to leave right now, immediately. And that's what we did. So we ran and caught a cab to go to our next destination. So after Hamid and I leave the pyramids, we go get a taxi, and we're going to go back to downtown Cairo. And we're driving along, and Hamid says something to the driver, and then we start to pull over. And I said to Hamid, what's going on? What are we doing? And he said, oh, I like these carrots. And you have to imagine we're pulling over next to a field. It's just an empty field on one side, kind of dilapidated housing, and on the other side it's just a wide open field. And there are two guys dressed in robes and a head wrap with a cart standing in this field, and one of them runs up to the cab as we stop. And Hamid says something, and then the guy says something, and it seems like a little heated exchange, and then the guy runs back to his cart. And I said, Hamid, what was that about? And he said, oh, the guy was trying to charge me too much for these carrots, and he knew it. I caught him. And I thought, okay. So we're sitting there, and the man comes back with a paper bag, and in the paper bag are purple carrots. And Hamid looks at the carrots, he checks them out, and then he gives the man some money. And the man starts to cry. He just starts to weep. And then he starts to like squeal. And then he climbs into the car through the window, and he's hugging Hamid, who's in the front seat. I'm in the back seat. And Hamid kind of pushes him out and says, you know, okay, okay. And then we drive off. And I said, Hamid, what was that about? And he says, well, I gave him a little extra money. And I said, well, how much? How much did you give him? I was thinking, I don't know, 20 bucks. And he said, I gave him an extra 5 Egyptian pounds, which it was worth, I think, 70 cents, 80 cents. And this man was so excited for that and so happy for that, because the living wage is so much less and they have to get by with less in Egypt. But Hamid giving him an extra 5 pounds, even after that discussion about price, it meant so much to this man, and surely made a difference. So that was a bizarre end to a day that started at the pyramids, started with a long cab ride getting to the pyramids, and then ending with a bit of charity and kindness for a man farming carrots by the side of the road. So those are 2 stories from my time in Cairo, and if we get a bit of Fino bread here, we'll have story and some bread. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I gotta say, this has been very tough for me to get this down, and it's this balance of heating the milk and the butter so that they melt and they're still hot enough to activate the yeast, but you don't kill the yeast. I've had a heck of a time trying to get this down. If you want to try it, maybe you'll have more luck than I have had, but you know, the whole point of this project is to learn stuff and try new stuff. So hopefully you enjoyed watching me, even when it didn't go so well. And maybe I gave you something to think about with my story too. So until next time, I'm your baking journalist, Tony Ganzer, and thanks so much. Bye.